Hi, I'm Adrienne Schaefer, Director of Program Innovation at MyLifeline.org Cancer Foundation. Today, I'm going to use the websites I've worked on as a sort of case study for looking at web analytics. I've worked at places like Sony Wonder Technology Lab in New York City. I worked at University Physicians and their Find a Doctor site. And I currently work at mylifeline.org Cancer Foundation, which is a place where we give free websites to cancer patients so they can connect with their friends and family and keep them updated during their diagnosis. So I've learned that understanding measurements is very important and not as intuitive as you might assume. One of our goals is to increase engagement because research shows the more cancer patients write and get comments, the more they feel supported, the more they adhere to prescribed treatments, which can lead to better outcomes. So it's really important to us. One way to measure engagement is to use time on site or time on page. In this example, somebody landed on our Find a Friend page, and because they're a slow typer, they spent maybe a minute typing Mary Smith. This took them to the search results page where they spent 30 seconds before clicking over to Mary Smith's page, where they spent 5 minutes reading their latest updates before leaving. So I used to think, and you might also think, that Google would report the time on the site as 6 minutes and 30 seconds. But I learned it would actually be reported as 1 minute and 30 seconds because Google counts entry and moving from page to page as an event for their calculations, but they don't count exit as an event. So there might be ways to actually set it up to count exit as an event, but that would take somebody getting into the back end. And there are other paid analytics tools which are varied as far as pricing goes, that could count the full time. And you can look into those if you need them, but it's just important to be aware of exactly what it is you're measuring and what it is you're seeing when you see a measurement. I think as long as you're using the same measure over time, you can at least compare your own data to see if time on site is decreasing, which is good if you're trying to make an experience more streamlined, or increasing if you're like us trying to engage users more. So, making sure others understand what you're measuring is also a very important thing. I learned this when I had a meeting with all of our staff, and I went through our stats report and I asked them, what do you understand when you look at this number? One of the eye-opening items for me was the report I gave them on the number of countries where visitors came from. They assumed it was the number of countries where we had registered members and not just website visitors. So really making sure that the people you're reporting to understand what they're looking at is important. One thing you could do is make a spreadsheet that has columns like organization objective, and an explanation of a measurement, and then the actual number. So really aligning your goals with what it is you're measuring, and then looking at the number. This is mylifeline.org's current homepage, and we are working on a redesign. So one of the first things we did was to think about our goals and prioritize them so that the designer could emphasize those elements. We also use Google Analytics to inform our design. It's hard to see, but this is an overlay that shows the percentage of clicks each element receives. Cancer patients was one of the most clicked areas, so we continue using that language since it seems people responded to it. Having goals for your organization that align with the goals on your website is another way to look at analytics that I highly recommend. One of our goals is to get members to sign up for our services. So I have a thank you page. It was simple for me to go in and set up my tracking so that anytime got to that thank you page after signing up, it's counted. Depending on what you want to track, donations, newsletter signups, the way your site works can make this harder or easier if you do or don't have a thank you page that you can track or some sort of page that they'll definitely hit. Usually a developer can help you figure out a way to get analytics to count that. So once I have my goals set up and identified in analytics, I like to dig into what is the most effective use of my resources. This is where you can really start making data-driven decisions. My top converting items are things like direct traffic, search, and AdWords. But once I get down to things like partner organizations, that's the really interesting part. I can see that some organizations send twice as many people as other organizations, and I know where those organizations are listing us. So I try to get more partnerships like the ones that are effective, and that's where I put my time. I've also worked with organizations who refer people to our site to look at the entire funnel, meaning I had them pull stats for the page we're listed on their site and look at what percentage of people clicked over to us. Then from there, what percentage of people actually signed up. So we could see which page along the way had the most drop off and might need the most work, or might be the best use of our time to work on. Whether it's donations or partnerships or ads, you want to be sure you're spending your limited resources on the most effective places. You can see there's no goals measured before June 2013, which is when I started and set them up. Google does not pull the stats prior to your setup. So get in there and do it as soon as you can, because you'll only be able to get stats going forward, not going backwards from when you set it up. Another thing I always set up for my website is an alert, because it helps you really capitalize on opportunities. If you can see that spike there in April of 2013, it was related to a patient who had a wedding donated. It was a really sweet story. Yahoo put it on their front page, and they linked to her site on my Lifeline. And things like that are great to know about, so I could really push it out and amplify it even further. One thing I've learned when setting up alerts is that sometimes it can take finessing, because you can tell it, email me if I'm over a certain percentage of visitors or a certain number of visitors, and obviously that's not helpful if you're getting emails all the time. You need to make some adjustments. Another story, when I was at CU Doctors, I had an alert about high traffic, and I assumed that was related to an ad I'd placed in the magazine, but when I dug deeper, I saw that it was actually connected to a provider who was connected to a news event. And so, unfortunately, my ad wasn't magical, but it did teach me to not make assumptions about my data and always look closely at where that traffic is coming from. So my favorite person in the analytics world is named Avinash Kaushik. He is an analytics ninja. And one of his constant phrases is segment, 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 because it allows you to really hone in on actionable data. So his blog is called Occam's Razor. Definitely entertaining, informative, worth checking out. What I segment personally depends on my question or organizational need. One segment that I've been looking at recently is mobile versus desktop traffic, because we're trying to decide what our budget is going to get put into. Is it going to be app development, responsive design, or focus more on desktop? So I pulled up a segment view of mobile, which I count as phones plus tablets versus desktop. And I could see that in 2012, since 2012, desktop use is going down and mobile use is going up. And if I extend those, I would expect mobile to surpass desktop. So yes, I should spend money on mobile. For you, it might be different. Maybe you serve a rural area which doesn't use phones. But overall, the trend is going more mobile, so it's definitely important to keep that in mind and when you're making new things for your website. I could also segment my segment and look at what devices people are looking at. Are they iPhones? Are they Android? What type of app should I be developing? That tells me if I need to really focus on Apple users and iPhones, or maybe make a native app, depending on where my users are coming from. Segmenting will help you get a better look at what users are doing and what actions they're taking. So if everyone who comes through your AdWords goes straight to your resource list, maybe you should have them landing on the resource page or make that link really prominent. I also learned a lot when I was setting up tracking for an internal site search. For cudoctors.com, I could see that people were searching for things like woman's doctor and coming up with 0 results because I had listed them all as OBGYNs. So I added those keywords to the OBGYNs profiles, and it helped build visits to those pages. I also help build the company intranet and which is the internal resource website. And I could tell by looking at their site searches on that internal site that the word intranet really confused them. They were confusing with internet because they were searching for things like Martha Stewart hamburger recipes and yahoo.com and postage rates. So for you, you might have something front and center say infographics, and if people are still searching for infographics, that could tell you they're just not seeing what you would expect them to, and you might need to make some changes. A few little tips and tricks I use are things like setting a date range with a comparison to the same month in the previous year. So you can easily see year over year what's your growth, or even month over month if that's the comparison you want to do. That's right underneath your date range in the top right corner when you're setting that, since you are your own best benchmark. There's also a little email button that allows you to set up an automatic report so that the report will just email you once a week or as often as you tell it, and you can use that to send it to a supervisor or a marketing person, whoever needs the information. And then this little shortcut button here adds a view to the left-hand sidebar. So if you often drill down into a particular report, you can just click that and it will save it to the sidebar. It'll save you some clicks in the future. So finally, I encourage you all to be data miners. Just dig in, maybe with an expectation of what you're going to find, sort of like a hypothesis, so that if what you're seeing deviates from what you expect, you know it's worth a closer look. I'm always just nosing around in the analytics to see what bits of information I can start to see. And I start to pick out stories of how people are using the site so that I can make it even better. So I definitely encourage you to go out and do your own